You bunch of pussies. I'm just getting started.
I couldn't believe some of the things they wrote about the prequels, you know? I mean, but really, beyond, I didn't like it. You ruined my childhood, and I'm still angry about the way they treated Jake Lloyd. He was only 10 years old, that boy, and he did exactly what George wanted him to do. Believe me, I understand clunky dialogue. So I almost got hornswoggled in that documentary where they weren't calling it The People versus George Lucas at the time, but I could tell from the questions they were asking me, it was an open invitation to trash George.
George Lucas raped our childhood. 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 George Lucas raped our childhood.
And I have issues with George, but I love that man.
You go to make a movie and all you do is get criticized, and people try to make decisions about what you're going to do before you do it. You know, it's not much fun, and you can't experiment. You can't do anything. You have to do it a certain way. I don't like that. I never did. I started out in experimental films, and I want to go back to experimental films. But of course, nobody wants to see experimental films.
The main thing is to protect these characters. Make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them.
I'm curious that the Force doesn't get muddled into a bunch of garbledygook.
Can I just say, though, a lot of times I would say to Ryan, we got to think about the fans. And he said, no, we got to think about the story, and we got to think about our movie. Which
Welcome back to Revenge of the Prequels, everyone. This is part 2 of Dissecting a Dumbass, where we continue going through our good friend Cosmonaut's embarrassment of a video regarding the beloved prequel trilogy. Okay, now I covered this in part 1, so I'll gloss over these disclaimers as quickly as I can so we can get right into it. Firstly, in regards to my opening intro, I've had people tell me that it's not required for the start of every episode in the series. I understand the frustration for long-time viewers, but please understand. I see the opening intro as part of the series' identity, but it also acts as a sort of prologue for newcomers to the series, to understand my motivation for creating the series in the first place. And that's what the intro essentially is, a short story regarding myself and how this series came to be. Secondly, this is an ongoing series possessing 10 other videos. Once you're done here, it's important to go back and watch the series from episode 1 onwards. This series has been going on for over a year, and by watching it from the beginning, you can see how the argumentation and the video quality has progressed, since my research as well as my community's input has helped me gain more insight knowledge into both the films themselves, as well as behind the scenes production info as well. Thirdly, as the title implies, this series is called Revenge of the Prequels. It's a specific response series designed to counteract poorly argumented videos against the Star Wars prequels. It is an aggressive and inflammatory series by design that's meant to mirror the attitude various creators have taken against these movies, its fans, and the original creator himself. Though I make it very clear in the videos that my insults are only meant to offend a very specific demographic, and that my insults are not the crux of my arguments, but simply me letting off steam, so to speak. But instead of acknowledging the actual arguments littered throughout my video's runtime, people who tend to simply disagree with my perspective will try and use my insults as a shield to discredit and misrepresent my work, saying there's no argumentation at all. I've also seen people say, and I'll paraphrase, as soon as you use insults, that voids any and all argumentation that you might have. Wow, what thin skin you have, being so insulted by comments made to someone else that you'll just ignore the actual arguments being made. In addition to that, the very second you start to lie or misrepresent my videos, or use dishonesty as your only means to argue against what I have to say, then that's the instant your argumentation gets flushed down the fucking toilet. Lastly, in regards to this little gem of a video many of you may or may not have seen, we have covered it in the channel's podcast this week. and I may give it the odd reference in the future when I try to make a point, and will try to include as much context as I can without derailing the video. But if you'd like to see the full breakdown, I've linked the podcast episode below. And the reason I bring this up at all is because this man was responding to my part 1 video on Cosmonaut. Not only did he miss the point of what I was saying multiple times, not only did he pick and choose small morsels of footage out of context multiple times, but the crux of his video was that I was a hypocrite because I call out people for their bullshit regarding the prequels, yet have the same vitriolic hatred towards the sequel trilogy, and that I am a, quote, toxic Star Wars fan. As a result, to prove this, he used my video on Cosmonaut regarding the prequels to say that I don't substantiate what I have to say about the sequel trilogy. Okay, firstly, I am not critiquing the prequels or the sequels as a whole in these videos. I am responding to the arguments made by other people, and I critique where it is necessary. Secondly, why the hell would you take my offhanded remarks on the sequels in a video that isn't even about them in the first place? Of course my comments are going to lack a substantial amount of depth, because the sequels are not the focus of this series. But what you can take from the comments I make is, yes, I do in fact hate the sequels. Now, in addition to that, and thirdly, to answer a question that I'm sure is pressing many newcomers, is why do I hate the sequel trilogy, yet still vehemently defend the prequels from poor arguments? Well, for starters, poor arguments don't distinguish themselves with just the prequels. You can make poor argumentation to just about anything, including the sequel trilogy. But from a more subjective standpoint, why do I defend the prequels yet hate the sequels, and exhibit the same hatred for them as the very hatred I am calling out in this series? Well, that's simple. To sum it up in a nutshell, the very hatred against the prequels was directed at large part to the original creator based on story decisions he had made, editing decisions he had made, or merchandising decisions he had made, which is perfectly within his right as a creator, and it's unreasonable to think that his actions as a creator should be dictated by a minority of unsatisfied fans.
Lucas making the prequels the way he wanted turned out to be shit because it didn't look, sound, act, or feel even remotely like the originals.
The Disney movies, on the other hand, aside from being terrible movies, I have no respect for from a creator standpoint because, newsflash, they are not the original creators. They bought the IP, and they have no respect for it themselves. They don't understand the IP or how to handle it. They are a corporate entity that doesn't respect the fans and simply wants to use the Star Wars brand to make money for themselves and their corporation. They have no respect for the creative process, they have no imagination or vision, and they have disrespected both Star Wars, its legacy, and its fans time and time again, just for the sake of making money. In regards to the prequels, you can't tell a creator how they, quote, should create their own product.
Star Wars should be simple. We just saw Han Solo talking like a... Star Wars should be simple.
Star Wars should be simple.
However, Disney is not the original creators, so I say in regards to that, criticize whatever the fuck you want. That's the difference. And finally, in regards to my thoughts on the sequel trilogy, rather than cherry-picking vague comments I made about the film in a series almost completely unrelated to them, how's about you reference the actual series I'm currently making on them? Regarding Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. You know, the 3 videos I've already made on the opening 10 minutes of that utter shit show of a movie, that collectively together is over an hour of content. Yeah, I guess it was too long for you to even bother, right? Seeing as you couldn't even bother to respond point by point to my entire video because you thought it was too long.
Alright, now I'm skipping through a lot of this video because it's 42 minutes fucking long. And only part 1 out of 5. So I can't possibly discuss everything. I want to, but I can't.
It's not that I was too long, it's that you are too lazy. And word of advice, if you're going to respond to someone, you need to cover the full video in full context. I don't like Cosmonaut, but at least I have enough respect for his video to actually put the fucking work in, so as not to take him out of context or misrepresent him. If only his fanboys would hold themselves to a higher standard when trying to defend their sacred cow. Their sacred cow, guys. Anyway, sorry this intro took so long. That covers just about everything I had to say. Thank you for being patient. So without further ado, let's begin.
They also never talk about how they feel, and all of the dialogue is just to tell us what is literally happening in the story. Take all the dialogue scenes in this movie and think about what their purpose is in the story. Two characters explaining where they are and what they're doing. Characters coming up with a plan. Characters coming up with a plan. Characters coming up with a plan and meeting someone new.
Right, now we already did cover this in part 1, but I'm just going to let it play from this point so we have sufficient context for what comes next.
Characters making a deal and coming up with a plan. Characters talking about the plot and what's happening. Characters coming up with a plan. Characters coming up with a plan. Inappropriate flirting.
You're a funny little boy.
Characters coming up with a plan. Do you see the fucking problem here? There are very few scenes of our characters being normal people and expressing emotions.
Now, to basically sum up what I said in regards to this on the previous episode is that firstly, he's misrepresenting the dialogue in the movie, dumbing it down to its simplest interpretation. This holds as much merit as saying Star Wars is just about laser swords and spaceships. He hasn't substantiated any of what he just said. Secondly, I said you can't pull emotion out of thin air to force the audience to be invested. That would be cheap bullshit. You can write it into the story, and George Lucas certainly does, but the emotional beats work because they're slowly built up to. And finally, characters don't have to explicitly talk about their feelings to inform the audience how they feel. Their actions as well as how they interact with other characters can inform the audience of their emotional stance as a character and how they feel about other characters as well. Also, how a scene is shot, as well as its musical tone, are extra tools a filmmaker can use to exhibit the emotional tone of the scene and the characters within.
In this movie, there is legitimately only one scene of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon talking to each other about anything that isn't the immediate plot. The only time they have a fucking heart-to-heart is at the end of the movie. For 99% of the runtime, these characters have no relationship to one another, and we never learn how they feel about each other.
I'm sorry for my behavior, Master. It's not my place to disagree with you about the boy. And I am grateful you think I'm ready to take the trials. Master Yoda, I gave Qui-Gon my word. I will train Anakin.
Yeah, I had no idea how Obi-Wan felt about Qui-Gon.
You still have much to learn, my young apprentice. Obi-Wan is ready.
I am ready to face the trials.
He is headstrong, and he has much to learn of the living force, but he is capable. There is little more he can learn from me. You've been a good apprentice, Obi-Wan. And you're a much wiser man than I am. I foresee you will become a great Jedi Knight.
Yeah, I had no idea how Qui-Gon felt about Obi-Wan. This movie has set up that these two have been master and apprentice for over a decade or so, because it establishes how young a Jedi must be to start their training, and Obi-Wan is a traditional Jedi. Not only does the movie show us how they feel about one another, with what they say and how they act, but we can assume so much more based on how long they've known each other. And their interactions with one another suggest a very long relationship. Saying you don't know how Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon feel about each other would be like saying that you don't know how a father and his adolescent son traditionally feel about each other.
Yet we're expected to care when this happens.
Yikes, and people say my videos make their ears bleed. That little gag doesn't negate the stupid fucking argument you just levied against the movie, jackass. Yes, a human being would fucking care about seeing a person watch his closest friend and mentor, who was the main character of the movie by the way, die in front of their very eyes, you retard.
This movie also has some of the most flat performances I've ever seen.
I don't fully understand. This is a strange place to me.
There is zero chemistry between any of these actors. Zero. I mean, literally, no chemistry. This movie is not fun to watch.
I feel like I've already covered the differences in how characters speak to one another in part 1 and why actors perform a certain way in various scenes, but let's get back to what you just said. Again, you said this movie is not fun to watch. Okay, The Last Jedi was a cinematic abortion, and watching it is torturous for me. But I wouldn't even say that movie isn't fun to watch. Because guess what? That's not up to me. There are people who enjoy watching it, and I gotta respect that, like it or not. If you had said, for example, because I find the performances so lifeless, this movie isn't fun to watch for me, then that's your opinion and I can't argue with it. Saying this movie is not fun to watch is an objective statement where I'll not only tell you why you're incorrect, but with the added exclamation point of go fuck yourself.
It's not even fun to make fun of.
Said the guy who made this very video.
Now, people have been making fun of this new scene from The Rise of Skywalker because of this particular line.
Oh, they fly now! They fly now? They fly now!
Yeah, because it's hammy, ridiculous bullshit that doesn't fit the tone of what's happening on screen. Not to mention Disney are pretending they're the ones who came up with the idea of jump troopers. But let me guess, you're gonna try and grasp at straws for why this works and why the prequels don't.
Oh, it's too quippy. It sounds like Marvel dialogue. Okay, yeah, whatever. Let's talk about this for a second, though. Compare this chase scene to a chase scene from this movie. Our heroes are going to be eaten by a giant monster. I wonder how they feel about this. Oh, they don't really care. These characters just can't be bothered to give a shit at all.
Just relax. Relax.
Okay, yeah, man, I won't worry.
Okay, well, firstly, this is a false equivalence. In The Rise of Skywalker, that chase was an ongoing battle between the protagonist and the stormtroopers. Oh wait, sorry, jump troopers. They're jump troopers now, guys.
They fly now!
Whereas the underwater chase is basically our protagonist trapped in a submerged box outrunning a fish. Now, for the first few seconds of this chase, they don't even realize that they are being pursued by a deadly creature. They are discussing Jar Jar's backstory while the audience is very much aware that a monster is chasing them while this is happening, mounting the tension until it actually attacks. When the creature does attack, the protagonists, who remember are trained Jedi Knights, don't panic because it's not in their nature to. Jedi's dicing battle droids or facing bounty hunters is very much a regular day for them. In other words, the Jedi are supposed to be the top tier of trained peacekeepers in the galaxy at the height of their power. The Trade Federation viceroys don't know how to deal with them or their power, which is why they were able to escape in the first place. When you see the Jedis kicking ass easily, and you point the finger at a lack of tension, this is very much by design. You're meant to observe the dominance of the Jedi rather than fear for their lives. I mean, you do for the first 5 seconds, and then you realize once you see how powerful they are, you're like, oh my god, holy shit. And it's basically like this for the entire runtime of the movie. This, however, gets flipped on its head when Darth Maul arrives, because then the Jedi are actually challenged. So that's help building to that scene. But back to the fish sequence, when the fish attack the Jedi, they remain calm as they are meant to, as they were trained to. Who's the character in the bongo that is panicking? The only character who hasn't had any training whatsoever. Jar Jar. He even straight up points this out to Qui-Gon.
What yet? Monsters out there, leaking in here, all sinking and no power? When are you thinking we're in trouble?
The film addresses these very concerns the audience may have for why the Jedi are like this, and it's like you just straight up ignore it. And personally, I always saw the fish sequence as an entertaining transitioning scene, where we learn more about Jar Jar rather than a straight up battle sequence, like the one you compared it to in The Rise of Skywalker. A more accurate comparison would be the sequence in Attack of the Clones with Anakin and Obi-Wan chasing the bounty hunter subordinate, or when they're pursuing Count Dooku at the very end of Attack of the Clones. But there is a sequence where you can clearly see some mild panic on the face of Qui-Gon as they're fleeing Naboo, as they're trying to break through the Trade Federation blockade, since the outcome of their survival is out of his control for once, while they're in space and going up a very heavily equipped Trade Federation blockade. Anyway, I think I've made my point.
Even when they're planning the final battle, they don't care.
Once we're inside, we shouldn't have a problem.
Oh yeah, won't be a problem.
Yeah, if everything goes according to plan, they shouldn't have an issue. 2 Jedi Knights and a Royal Assault Force against a select amount of battle droids in the location where the bad guys are least expecting an attack? I'd say those are pretty good odds. But as we all know, things don't go according to plan.
No use in me being emotionally invested.
Call me whatever you want, I guarantee before you became an internet ass clown pandering to a select demographic of prequel haters, you were absolutely on the edge of your seat during the finale of this movie and sucking George's dick like the rest of them.
The movie has low stakes, low energy, and it really doesn't allow you to engage with it in the same level that you would with any other Star Wars movie. So yeah, personally, I'll take these corny, energetic performances over this shit any day of the fucking week, but hey, that's just me.
Goddamn right.
So anyway, let's talk about the actual plot. And I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I have never known the plot of this movie until now. Most of the times when I watch this movie, it's with friends where we just quote the awkward or funny moments until we get bored and turn it off halfway through. But as far as the plot goes, I am only just now piecing it together after having watched this movie for 20 years. That is not a good sign.
How are you not embarrassed to admit that?
But hey, maybe it's just me, right? Maybe I'm the dumbass who just doesn't get it.
Goddamn right.
So I even asked you guys on Twitter if you knew the plot of this movie, and most of you didn't. I actually expected most of you guys to lie or just check the wiki, but no, you guys were pretty honest for once.
And why would someone lie if they're smarter than you? You understand that's not a very high bar.
And I don't think this is because the plot is overly complicated. I mean, it is, but that's not why we don't understand it. It's because the plot is not conveyed properly to the audience.
You know, it's a film for 12-year-olds.
You can't even read!
For a movie that's mostly just our characters telling us what they're going to do and then doing that thing with no diverging paths, this movie is really bad at conveying what the story is.
Just because you didn't understand the plot, it doesn't mean the movie did a bad job at conveying the story. Perhaps if you actually watched the film instead of memeing with your friends, as you mentioned previously, you'd actually understand a movie that has been designed to be understood by a fucking 12-year-old.
The story is presented to us in a way where we cannot understand it unless we can read the minds of the characters.
No, you just have to pay attention, dipshit.
In this movie, information is conveyed in a very strange and vague way. Take, for example, the scene where Anakin is being interviewed by the Jedi Council. They ask him some random questions, and then they say, sorry, he's evil, we cannot train him.
No, they say he's too old to begin the training, as Yoda has also mentioned in The Empire Strikes Back when he had reservations about Luke training.
No. He's too old.
He's too old. Yes, too old to begin the training.
But this alone tells the audience that the Jedi need to start their training very young. The reason the Jedi didn't want to train Anakin is because of how attached he clearly was to his mother by that point.
They say they sense fear in Anakin, and that is the main reason why he's not to be trained. So you're telling me you expect the kid to just not be scared at all?
A child can be scared of dangers in the world. That's instinctual for any living being. Yoda explicitly says,
"Your thoughts dwell on your mother."
I miss her.
Afraid to lose her, I think.
What does that got to do with anything?
Everything.
It's not simply that he's afraid and that's the end of it. He is afraid of losing someone he is very much attached to.
Wouldn't it make more sense to train someone to be less fearful than to just expect them to have the emotions of a Jedi once they get here?
That's where the Jedi training comes in, you idiot. Jedi get trained not to be fearful and not to get attached. The Jedi do not train a person who has a predisposition of attachment, which they've acquired over substantial time with their caregivers. This doesn't mean they don't grow attached during training, as Obi-Wan was clearly very attached to Qui-Gon as well. But Obi-Wan by that point had progressed enough to deal with his grief maturely. During the fight with Darth Maul after Qui-Gon gets stabbed, there is no John Williams music for the first time in the fight, and Obi-Wan's aggressive choreography is on full display whilst fighting Darth Maul. He's clearly struggling with Qui-Gon, being mortally injured. It's likely the first time he's had to undertake an obstacle like this on his own without his master's help, and it's also the first time in the whole movie he's looked aggressive and challenged. However, unlike Luke in Return of the Jedi, Obi-Wan has been traditionally trained and is able to keep his emotions in check.
They know he's strong in the Force, but they still tell Qui-Gon that he can't train him. But what's the alternative? Just send him back home and hope he doesn't harness his inherent Force powers?
Pretty much, or they could put him in some kind of Republic orphanage, which I'd imagine he'd very much prefer over slavery. And yeah, good luck harnessing the Force without training, because in case you fucking forgot, Cosmonaut, Force-sensitive individuals require training to utilize their power. Though that's not something you'd appreciate or even acknowledge, since you like to suck the dick of these abominations.
And Qui-Gon just says, oh, well, I'm just going to train him anyway. You're just allowed to do that? You can just do whatever you want? If you can do that, then why does anybody ask for permission?
No, he can't do that. He's defying the Council, you tool. It's one of the reasons why people love Qui-Gon. He has grievances with the Jedi Code and doesn't always follow the rules. He's a moral grey character. despite the fact you claim these characters have zero character traits.
The boy is dangerous.
Okay, but why? Literally just tell us why. Somebody please tell me something. Please, sir, may I have some movie?
He's dangerous because of his massive fucking midichlorian count, meaning he is extremely force sensitive, and because he has a very risky predisposition to begin Jedi training. And need I remind the audience, I haven't even used the other films to help justify this point as of yet, by the way, since I know some dipshit's gonna be like, see, you can't defend The Phantom Menace without the other movies. Well, nice try, but this movie stands fine on its own.
Even when you look at the finer details of the movie, there's shit that just doesn't make any sense. For instance, why would you bring Anakin to a war zone?
Okay, now we are getting to some valid points. Yes, this is an issue I personally have with the film myself, but let's explore it anyway. Firstly, if Qui-Gon didn't take Anakin to the palace with him, where else could he have left him? Okay, he can't leave him on the Naboo cruiser ship, since the Federation droids likely would have seized it by then. He can't leave him with the Gungans, since they've all gone to war, unless there's like the women and children of the Gungans that could look after Anakin while the Jedi are away. Okay, that's a feasible scenario. But remember, Qui-Gon promised Shmi he'd watch over Anakin for her. Possible he didn't trust him in the care of anyone else other than himself or the Jedi. And so he thought Anakin would be safe with him as long as he could find him somewhere safe to hide inside the palace. But the reason the Jedi were sent back to Naboo was to flush out Darth Maul, which means having Anakin around was even more irresponsible. Anakin was placed there so that he could be the wild card in the final conflict. But Qui-Gon bringing him there was not very smart, or just extremely arrogant, even if he was just simply keeping his promise to his mother. Now, what I'm trying to get at here is that the script doesn't just say, yeah, okay, here it is, deal with it. What I'm trying to say here is that the script does work to compensate for this. While they're inside the Naboo palace, it's very clear that Anakin is Qui-Gon's first and only priority until he is safe. When he's inside, he tells him straight away to stay put and find cover, while they take care of business. Look, the short answer is that the script does try to work this in to some extent, but on the whole, it's a clunkily written character decision. I honestly think it would have made more sense if Anakin had stowed away with them and Qui-Gon had to keep him safe out of pure circumstance. But anyway, the point of this section is that there is some nuance behind why Anakin is there and what the characters do with him while he is. Not to mention, in Qui-Gon's defense, he is a bit of a flawed character. He has been shown to be very reckless throughout the course of this movie. Padme even calls him out on it. Says, if you're a representation of the Jedi, you guys are far too reckless. And then Qui-Gon, in a very smug and arrogant manner, basically tells her to deal with it.
Are you sure about this? Trusting our fate to a boy we hardly know? The Queen will not approve.
The Queen doesn't need to know.
Well, I don't approve.
You Jedi are far too reckless. The Queen is not.
The Queen trusts my judgment, young handmaiden. You should too.
You assume too much.
Granted, Qui-Gon thinks he's interpreting the Force when he bet on Anakin.
Finding him was the will of the Force. I have no doubt of that.
But it's still a lot to gamble on a pod race for a kid you barely know. So while the decision wasn't necessarily smart, the character motivation to make said decisions is somewhat present throughout the movie. See, this is what I like to do. We've taken a point that I've previously had an issue with. I've examined the movie, I've gone through it, I've examined the characters, and now we've come up with a sort of middle ground here. You see what I mean? There's always room for more discussion. Anyway, let's move on.
Qui-Gon already has an apprentice, and now he just grabbed another one and brought him along to the war.
Anakin, stay where you are. You'll be safe there.
But I...
Stay in that cockpit.
You stay here.
But Rick!
No buts.
Pretty sure I covered most of this, but Qui-Gon said Obi-Wan was a fully trained apprentice who was ready to face the trials. In other words, he was ready to graduate Jedi Academy, so to speak. He also tells Anakin that he's not allowed explicitly to train him, but he wants Anakin to watch him in his presence and observe so he can learn.
I'm not allowed to train you, so I want you to watch me and be mindful. Always remember, your focus determines your reality. Stay close to me, and you'll be safe.
So we have Anakin tagging along, again, to Naboo and to the final battle, as Qui-Gon being both his primary caregiver and his unofficial teacher. Again, I'm not saying this excuses Anakin being taken along to a war zone, But once again, the script does try to compensate for this in certain ways.
Also, why would you go down to Naboo in separate ships? It's kind of a throwaway line, and it ends up not mattering in the long run, but from a logistical standpoint, it doesn't make any sense.
It makes perfect sense. It is more practical for the following reasons. Firstly, the Jedi would be harder to spot traveling solo instead of traveling together. Secondly, if one gets captured, the other can proceed with the mission or bail the other one out, essentially covering their bases.
Stay down!
Obviously, there is a risk that goes along with it, but if they were spotted together and the whole army bears down on them, well, they'd also be fucked, wouldn't they?
You guys could just go on the same ship. You're really fucking lucky they parked next to each other.
What kind of idiotic fucking army would park their ships on opposite sides of the planet and divide their forces? The Jedi knew the ships would land in close proximity to one another since they are an invading army. They are invading. Why the hell would you invade and say, hey, you guys go to that side of the planet, you guys go to this side of the planet? It makes no fucking sense. Of course they were going to land together, you toolbox.
What does Palpatine want to accomplish with this fucking trade blockade? This is his most roundabout and complicated plot ever, and he's already known for those. He has no problem with killing the Jedi in the beginning, but he's just gonna try and convince Padme politely to accept his terms?
Yeah, because the Jedi were never meant to be there. Padme was never meant to make it to Coruscant. Palpatine is using the Trade Federation to invade his own planet to generate a sympathy vote for himself in the Senate.
I feel confident our situation will create a strong sympathy vote for us. I will be Chancellor.
And undermine the Chancellor Valorum, furthering his own position. If she signs the treaty and the Federation kill Padme despite her making the invasion legal, Palpatine wins. If Padme makes it to Coruscant, which she wasn't meant to, then Palpatine still wins. He just had to find a way to manipulate her, as shown in the movie. When Padme actually goes along with what he was scheming, you can see the surprised look on his face. He's like, oh shit, this is actually happening. So it's not like Palpatine can see the future or anything like that. He has his schemes and he works them in where he needs to. Not everything went according to plan for him, like supposedly did in Attack of the Clones, but that's another conversation. As far as the Phantom Menace goes, Amidala was never meant to make it to Coruscant. Palpatine had to improvise. Palpatine got his way, and then whatever happened after that was he didn't give a fuck. He's like, alright, wipe him out. Maul, you kill the Jedi. Viceroys, fucking nuke the city. I don't give a shit. Make that sympathy strong. More or less.
He doesn't have any problem trying to kill her in the later movies. I don't understand this man.
No, he absolutely wanted to kill her in the first movie, as I just explained. As for the second movie, well, again, that's a conversation for another day.
What does he even want? I always found it strange that Palpatine's ultimate goal is to just be president and rule everything.
Fucking why not? That sounds like a sweet life right there.
It seems like a really simple-minded goal for someone who's supposedly so wise and attuned to the Force. Normally, I don't really care if a villain's motivations are simplistic, especially in Star Wars.
But it's the prequel, so gotta find some way to frame it in a way that makes the audience hate it, right?
But this is a movie that's trying to be more complex than the previous films, and it's just not very good at it. The entire plot of all three of these movies revolve around Palpatine's schemes, and his schemes never make any sense.
Well, Palpatine wins, so they must have made some sense after all.
There's also this thing with the prequels where you can sometimes take a single line and try to analyze it, and it just doesn't make any sense from a simple writing perspective. I'm serious, this is in every single one of these movies.
A communications disruption can mean only one thing: invasion.
I'm pretty sure you can do that in just about any movie, with a few exceptions, of course. But let's see where he goes first.
No, it doesn't. You're telling me that if your communications get messed up, the only reason is that you're being attacked?
That doesn't make the line itself nonsensical writing-wise. It just means the character in question was possibly jumping the gun on his claims, and was simply incorrect. But in actuality, he was absolutely right. That's what the Trade Federation were going to do anyway. Not to mention, they've just had an aggressive dispute with the Trade Federation, who have blockaded their planet, and all of a sudden communications go down. Those are suspicious circumstances indeed.
You've made a commitment to the Jedi Order, a commitment not easily broken.
Not easily broken? You mean not easily maintained?
I'll concede another point on this one. I've always found this line a little odd, but I'm sure what Obi-Wan meant was, you've spent 10 years trying to become a Jedi. This is a big commitment. Don't be so quick as to throw it away simply for some girl.
The oath itself is very easily broken.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
But Obi-Wan, that in itself is an absolute statement.
Yes, we know. In regards to the last line, there's more to discuss. But let's get back to what I said before. Why do you think this applies only to the prequels? I'm not denying they exist, but what a lot of OT fanatics try to do is blame issues with Star Wars as a whole squarely on the prequels.
George is not good at writing dialogue. It would be very funny if it wasn't so sad. And I should now probably mention the one thing people say is the biggest problem with this movie: Jar Jar. Honestly, all of the other issues in this movie are actually worse than Jar Jar. Lifeless performances, bad dialogue, a convoluted plot, and an overall lack of direction are all things that I hate way more than one dumb character.
Not that most of your previous points were even remotely correct, but bravo for having some common sense.
And if we're being real, while he's annoying, his role in the story actually makes more sense than Anakin's.
What?
The worst thing about Jar Jar is that you literally cannot understand what he's saying. I watched this movie with subtitles for the first time, and I only now, 20 years later, have understood what the fuck Jar Jar has been saying.
First off, how come it took you so long? Second of all, what happened to you telling us how Jar Jar is more important than Anakin?
Miss a day starting pretty okie day with the brisky morning munchin', then boom!
I have no fucking clue what you just said, but hell yeah, man, I'm gonna speak my truth.
But despite this, they actually need Jar Jar around for most of the movie. I really hate admitting it, but he's so integral to this dumb-ass story that you kind of need him here more than you need the other characters.
Jar Jar is important for this movie, sure. But what this movie does quite well, in fact, is making each protagonist important. You need Jar Jar for the Gungans, and to pick a fight with Sebulba in the Tatooine markets. You need Queen Amidala for obvious reasons. You need Anakin for the pod race and the final battle, and you need the Jedi for everything in between, as well as the final battle. Matter of fact, the reason why the awesome final battle is fought on 4 main fronts is because each protagonist has a crucial role to fulfill.
However, it doesn't make any sense that you bring him into Mos Eisley with Qui-Gon, and not Obi-Wan Kenobi, one of the main characters.
Well, much like Anakin, Jar Jar wound up in Qui-Gon's care. As we saw in the movie, Jar Jar owes Qui-Gon his life, a life debt as per Gungan custom. And so Jar Jar goes to town with Qui-Gon. Now let's say that the Trade Federation track them down, or if bandits or bounty hunters attack the ship and go after the Queen. Obi-Wan is there to protect her in absence of his master. What if both the Jedi went and the Queen's ship got attacked? Who's gonna defend them? And what the fuck would Jar Jar do if he was there? At least if Jar Jar is with Qui-Gon, he can keep an eye on him. Not to mention, the reason Jar Jar is there in the first place is because of Qui-Gon. Perhaps Qui-Gon doesn't want to let the character be someone else's burden. Anyway, moving on.
Actually, I take that back. I can't even say he's a main character in this movie. It is truly baffling to me how small Obi-Wan's role is in this movie. I think the only reason people are moved by Qui-Gon's death is because Qui-Gon gets way more screen time. He's closest to being the main character.
No. Qui-Gon isn't closest to being the main character. He is the main character. Qui-Gon's the primary main character. Obi-Wan is a secondary main character. When Qui-Gon dies, then it transitions to Obi-Wan as the main character for the rest of the movie. The Jedi were said to be fulfilling the role of C-3PO and R2-D2 in A New Hope. And in A New Hope, the droids were the main characters. George Lucas has gone on record saying it. Now, if Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were fulfilling the role of C-3PO and R2-D2 as POV characters for the audience, then they, under the author's own metric, would be the main characters. Now, with that said, I absolutely agree that The Phantom Menace is Amidala's story, just like A New Hope is Luke's story. I've said in this series many times that Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon are the main characters, but they aren't the characters of interest. The important plot points don't involve them as characters. They facilitate the events, they are the driving force, sure, but the important shit is happening to everyone else.
And just think about how much characterization Obi-Wan has in episodes 2 and 3. In episode 2 and 3, you find out that he doesn't really like flying that much. That's kind of a cute character trait. I wish he had traits in this movie.
I've already been through this, and yes, much like Han, Luke, and Leia became the main characters in episodes 5 and 6, after Qui-Gon passes away, the focus then turns from the Jedi into our new 3 main characters in episodes 2 and 3, being Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Padme. You got the prequel trio, and you have the original trilogy trio. In the opening to the original trilogy, you had the droids as the POV characters, introducing us into the world, and in The Phantom Menace, similar structure, you had the Jedi as our POV characters. George specifically wanted one trilogy to rhyme with another, though they be two completely different stories. What's so hard to grasp about that?
The only character with traits in this movie is, again, Jar Jar.
Bullshit.
So yeah, while Jar Jar is really awkward and a fucking stupid addition to the movie, he's the only thing in the movie that feels real. Whenever I watch this movie and he shouts this line, I seriously wake up from the coma that this movie put me in.
Speaking of comas, this abortion of a video is putting me to sleep.
If he wasn't in the movie, I legitimately think the movie would be worse.
Well, it would have been worse because the story, like it or not, cannot function without him.
Think about it. It would just be these dry humans delivering boring dialogue. It would be so boring that I don't think I'd be able to sit through it.
It's true, Jar Jar does lighten up a lot of scenes. It's one of his main functions as a comic relief character. But politics and world building aren't boring, you shallow-minded Empire space battle horny rat fuck.
Honestly, in order to fix this movie, you would need to reformat the entire plot. Everything is broken.
Says the man who up until recently didn't understand a movie directed at 12-year-olds.
Most people agree that the biggest problem here is that you can just delete this whole movie from the trilogy and it changes nothing.
Well, those people don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Without episode 1, so much with episodes 2 and 3 would not make any sense and they couldn't function on their own. You'd miss out on Anakin's backstory with his origins, his midichlorian count, the reasons why he's separate from the other traditional Jedi, what makes him different, his relationship with his mother, and his meeting with Padme. You'd have no idea how Palpatine rose to power, to begin with, and you'd have no idea how the Jedi or the Senate operate.
A lot of Star Wars viewing guides actually recommend that you just don't watch this movie.
Well, firstly, where's your evidence? And secondly, any Star Wars fan with a brain knows not to let those idiots define what movie they can and cannot skip.
How sad is that? The spin-off movies are equally useless in the grand scheme of things, but those movies are fun and a little experimental, so I don't really mind them. They don't really hurt anybody by existing.
Except when they make iconic characters look and sound very, very, very stupid.
This movie really hurts my feelings by existing. It just genuinely bothers me whenever I watch it. There's no main character. The characters that are in this movie don't have any traits or personalities, and if you try to break this movie into a beginning, middle, and end, you would have trouble finding out where each part begins.
Act 1, Jedi rescued the Queen, emergency land on a poor planet and find a gifted slave boy. Act 2, Jedi gamble on the gifted slave boy to win a pod race, allowing them to acquire passage off-world. The Jedi recognizes the boy's abilities and frees him from slavery, allowing him to pursue the path of the Jedi with him having to leave his mother behind. Act 3, Jedi make it to Coruscant, the boy is rejected. From Jedi training, the Queen faces the Senate and is unable to resolve her planetary dispute peacefully, so she opts to take it back by force. They make peace with the Gungans, a final battle ensues, the good guys win, Qui-Gon tragically dies, and everyone celebrates. There, beginning, middle, and end, you dumb fuck.
Nothing in this movie works at all. This one is a really big disappointment, and if I was an adult when I watched this movie, I don't think I would even like Star Wars anymore. And the worst part is, we still have 2 more movies to go.
Yeah, don't remind me. I'll see you again soon, Cosmo cunt. And that was part 2 of this Revenge of the Prequels episode. Just think, we aren't even half done yet. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, there's 10 other episodes of this series. If you're going to watch them, the best way to do it is at the start from episode 1 and work your way down the list. Before I go, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to all of my patrons. You guys are amazing and I appreciate your support very much. If you'd like to support the channel with a monthly donation, even if it's just $1 per month, the link to Patreon will be in the description below. I'd also like to thank my YouTube members. Thank you to the Star Killers, the Captain Prices, and the Master Chiefs for all of your support. I very much appreciate it. It goes a long way and it helps me immensely to make content. Now, if you'd like to contact me, you can reach me on Twitter, or preferably you can contact me on the channel's Discord server. What Discord is basically an online community where others who follow this channel congregate together to talk about a range of different topics, ranging from Star Wars to video games, anime, and so on. I hope to see you there, and chances are you'll make some friends along the way. Now, with all that said, here's one more thank you for staying till the end of the video. You are a legend, and I'll see you next time.
The main thing is to protect these characters. Make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them.
I sold them to the white slavers.
Star Wars The Phantom Menace was the most disappointing thing since...
Share your energy with me! Spirit box me!